Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. And then a leper approached, did him homage, and said, "Lord, if you wish, you can make me clean." He stretched out his hand, touched him, and said, "I do will it. Be made clean." His leprosy was cleansed immediately. Then Jesus said to him, "See that you tell no one, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." The Gospel of the Lord. I know, word must have gotten out that I'm celebrating the Mass. It's like the church is empty. I'm not even going to preach to you after that. You can... Okay. This morning in the Gospel of Matthew, we just read something that perhaps to our ears sounds very familiar. It's one of these stories when a leper comes to Jesus and says, "Lord, would you please cure me?" And he does. I think it's kind of like being Catholic and reading a gospel like that is kind of like being Catholic and looking at the crucifix. We get awful used to it, and it doesn't really strike us the way that it should. First of all, this is the first, I did the research, this is the first time in Matthew's gospel that the word leper or leprosy even shows up. Now, for Jewish people, there's two things going on. First of all, if you were a leper, you were obliged to remain separated from the rest of the community. You were considered a danger to the community, so they were always obliged to stay outside of society. And if they got close to people or people came close to them, they were supposed to call out, "Unclean, unclean," and if they were to dare to enter into like a public place, people would have perfect right to throw stones at them and chase them off and get rid of them because you're unclean. Now, the uncleanliness implied two things. One, you're contagious, we don't want you around. But it was also considered to be a ritual, a spiritual kind of uncleanness. So in the Jewish law, there was this connection between things that make you impure. And that's one of the things that Christ came to, if you want, correct. It's not as if the Jewish law was wrong because God made it, but it was a training. It was to form a mentality so that we could eventually learn the things that truly make us impure and unclean are spiritual. They're the things that come out of our heart. So this is the context. So this leper approached Jesus and says, "Lord, if you wish, you can make me clean." Again, on the surface, that sounds like it's not a big deal. What would it have taken for a leper to approach Jesus under this context and to dare to ask him that? This is the first time it happens in Matthew's gospel. It means that something about Christ made him understand Christ will not reject me. Christ will not turn me away. Christ will be open to me. And even though he probably was wrestling with the temptation, the people are going to throw stones at me, but nonetheless, after hearing about Christ, perhaps hearing him directly, albeit from a distance, something about Christ, he understood, this man is different. He will treat me with compassion. And furthermore, this man is different. He has the power to cure. He calls him Lord. Now, again, it doesn't necessarily... Lord was the word, Kyrios was the word used. It was one of the titles used for God himself. However, it's also true. It was kind of just a sign of respect. Actually, I looked it up in modern Greek. If you call somebody Kyrios, or whatever the modern word for it is, you can even just be like, "Boss." So it's like, "Hey, chief." But nonetheless, he calls him Lord. It's a title of divinity, or at least it could be used that way. I trust that you will not turn me away, and I trust that you have power to heal me if you choose. What an incredible act of faith. He's putting himself out there. And when we approach Christ and we kind of put ourselves out there that way, Christ will never reject us. It's interesting. I was wondering to myself in my prayer, are there any gospel passages where somebody approaches Christ and asks for healing and Jesus says no? I don't think there are. However, when we apply it to our own lives, there are times that we can ask God for healing and the answer is no. Why is that? That's a whole other homily, but I think there are times that Christ knows that this is something that there are different reasons. There are saints that Christ will allow to have these ongoing sufferings because he's in a sense asking them, will you be willing to bear this with me for the salvation of souls? That's one option. Secondly, sometimes Christ knows that we need those sufferings in order to be purified spiritually. That's a second option. But what is clear is whenever we approach Christ with radical confidence and with the humility of this leper, knowing that he's setting himself up possibly for, failure, humiliation, and possibly receiving a few stones, when we turn to Christ and we make ourselves vulnerable before Christ, he will always hear us. He has freedom to give the answer he wants, but he will never simply ignore us. He will always hear that prayer. He will always respond to us in the way that he knows that is best. And therefore, we can always have radical confidence in approaching Christ with these dispositions of trust and of humility. So, let us today learn from the leper, okay? Learn from the leper today and allow Christ to do the things that, allow Christ to show his mercy in our lives. Father and Son and Holy Spirit.